right. Welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking today. It is Wednesday. Yeah, always in a good mood. I always say that on Wednesdays. Yeah, because we're halfway through the week. And so, yeah, I guess, there's another week in the books, if you will. And we're almost halfway through the year as well, which is kind of amazing. Although I feel good personally, yes, it's a beautiful day here too. But things are just, and again, we talk about this with Arlen too. He comes on and he's always sort of, I don't think I'm talking out of turn. He says it right on this program. He's feeling bad about the way the world is. And I don't know who isn't. I mean, times, unless you're kind of a sociopath, I guess if you're a Trump, if you're a Musk, if you're a Kamala Harris and you had won, you'd be feeling good. But for most people, I think we see the images of children starving. We know just how rough things are in this country. We know people are being deported and sent to gulags by the Trump administration. I think it kind of wears on you. I think most people, unless you really are kind of sociopathic, you have some feeling, some concern for others. And when we see what we're doing in our world, it's heartbreaking. It really is. There's just no other way to look at it. So, yeah, we're all kind of bad. We all feel bad. What we try to do here at Halitics, what I try to do, is come up with some solutions to work together to figure out ways we can make things just a little bit better. And, as you know, I'm very critical of the Democrats. I don't think the Democrats are the answer. In fact, I had a queued up. I was going to talk a little bit about a piece that I got in an email from Sirota, David Sirota of The Lever, and he's written all over the place. And I've never been a big fan of Sirota. He's pretty far to the left, about as far to the left as you can go and still be kind of acceptable in mainstream media, which I think he sort of is. But his recent piece in The Lever, while he claims to be speaking for the downtrodden, the disaffected, he talks about how the Democratic Party is partly to blame for Trump's election in the first place, and that fighting oligarchy means fighting the leadership, the elites in both parties. What he doesn't do, what he cannot do, what he will not bring himself to do is say, no, we need to move away from the Democrats altogether. He can't do that. He points to some Democrats and Bernie, who, although he runs as an independent, is clearly closely tied to the Democratic Party. He's in Democratic leadership in the Senate. What Sirota does is he says, okay, there's good Democrats and not so good Democrats, but he won't outright condemn the party. I think that's terribly wrong-headed. That's not just misguided. I think that reflects true corruption. I'm not going to make excuses and say, well, maybe that's a different strategy. That's a strategy I believed in for many years. Yes, we need to rebuild the Democrat Party. We need to have a revolution within the party itself. That's what our revolution was, founded to do, to play in what they like to say an inside-outside game. But it's pretty much inside, right? I mean, they'll go out and they'll, protest at events where there's Democrats. But bottom line is they're always looking for Democrats that they can tie to their they can tie their apron strings to and say, hey, look, this guy's with us. Rokon is with us. AOC's with us. Bernie's with us. That's not working. That is a strategy that has failed. The Democratic Party changes people who enter it with the express intention of changing, or maybe they always were corrupt, but whatever, causes the AOCs and the Jamal Bowmans and the Bernies to slowly but surely become more and more pro-Democrat, more and more pro-Democratic Party rather than pro-worker, pro-person, pro-consumer, pro-life. Whatever it is, pro-peace, it happens. It happens over and over and over again. We must go in a different direction. And Sirota doesn't even mention emerging parties in his newsletter. We'll talk. I'll feature that in great detail tomorrow, but it just really, really grated on me. The question we're asking today, though, can Greta Thunberg and the Freedom Flotilla stop Israel and the United States? And more generally, can any of us do anything to stop Netanyahu and Trump from completely wiping the Gazan people off the planet? And if you think that's too, hyperbolic, I'm over the top, well, here's your headline from Al Jazeera. And please be aware, if you aren't already, that the media, the Arab media, has been consistently correct. There's really, Israel used to say, oh, you can't believe Al Jazeera, and they still tried that, but they've never come up with anything that it's gotten wrong. So Israel kills nearly 100 people in Gaza in 24 hours, halts aid. So that's just another horrific detail. The millions that still, have managed to, I guess, exist, and that's all they're doing is existing in Gaza, are now being starved to death. Those who aren't droned, who aren't blown up, are actually being starved to death. And Israel saying no food, nothing. You get nothing. More headlines from Al Jazeera. This is today. This is this morning. This is just before I went on. 95 Palestinians killed and 440 injured in Israeli attacks. That's a large number of injured. We focus more on the death count, obviously, but the number of injured is obviously a terrible, terrible fact as well of this killing spree, this pogrom by Israel. 440 injured in attacks by Israel across Gaza over the past 24 hours. And Israel has said, hey, I know you're starving. We know you're starving. Don't try to get food or we'll shoot you. We've warned them, don't approach roads in the U.S.-backed aid and distribution sites run by this controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is kind of it's an NGO that is designed to reward friends of Trump and friends of Bibi, as far as I can understand. I don't say that factually, but it's privately run, it's contractor run, it's not UN, and they've done a horrible job. The UN has said, this is the wrong way to go, and obviously they're right. And when Gazans show up, because they're dying, they're starving, they get shot. So that's what Israel does. It's the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is our moral obligation? What do we have? What can we do? What should we do? Now, what Greta Thunberg is doing, and I believe 11 or 12 other heroes, what they're doing, I don't use that term lightly. I use it because it's the right term, because it describes them. They're heroes. They're actually trying to save lives. And not only saving lives, but they're saving lives by standing up to a genocidal regime. They're putting their own lives at grave risk. Unlike me, I'm just sitting here and what is our duty? What is our obligation? Is our obligation to now get out in the streets and try to absolutely stop the oligarchy completely? Is that what we have an obligation to do? Because I sort of say it is. I don't shy away from saying we need to do things that I myself am not prepared to do. But I think we need to figure out what our moral obligations are at this point. I've had people say to me, I worry about you. You go on the air and you're so critical of Israel and you're critical of the United States. And, it's risky. And my answer, this is not Nazi Germany. As far as I know, as a U.S. citizen, I'm not going to be disappeared. I'm not going to be sent to a concentration camp. I don't have much influence. I don't get a lot of likes or click. That's the least you could do is just like what I'm doing, subscribe now, the whole 9 yards with this video. But, this isn't a situation, as far as I know, if I'm putting myself at risk, I'm really not aware of it. So I don't want to I won't take credit for doing that. I just won't, because I don't feel like I'm doing anything that requires a lot of bravery. Even, in fact, for me, this is this is really all I could do. It's not like I could go do a 9-to-5 job now anyway. I wouldn't be able to, when the last time I kind of took orders and direction from a boss, didn't go work too well. Didn't work out so well for me or for them, Frank. I guess. I don't know how my former employer feels. Probably they're not thrilled. I don't know. I'm sure I did fine when I was there, but I'm not there anymore. So what do we have? How far do we have to go? How uncomfortable must we make ourselves to be morally just in this time? And, I think the answer is you got to do what you can do. This is how serious this is. Since October 7, 2023, Israel and the U.S. have killed at least 54,607. That's the latest death count. We know the number's much, much, much higher. And just this year alone, since March, Trump and Netanyahu have killed, I think that number's correct as far as it goes, 4336 Gazan, 1,500 to 2,000 or more children. It's as bad as it can be. It's just horrific. I say this day after day, and I can't get it out of my mind. So I wonder, what do we have? What should we do? One thing we can do, and I'll get to the video from Ms. Thunberg. Thunberg, I don't know how it's pronounced. Some people call her Thunberg. I really don't know. I played from Medea. Medea now at Code Pink, they posted a video. And I didn't go down. I was planning to go downtown today, go down to the Hill. In fact, that's why I had originally posted this program would go live at 3 p.m., but I just got bogged down with a lot of prep work, and I could not get away. I just would have been too late, and I didn't feel like driving an hour, close to an hour, parking the car, 45 minutes, parking the car, maybe not getting to the House of Representatives until well into the activity. So I just decided I would stay in and do this program. But I will try to make it down there tomorrow. But even that's like not really putting myself at risk. The least we can do, just go ahead. I put the link in the description. So I got this email from World Without War, and they're a good organization, a part of Peace Action, which I have been working with as well as Code Pink. Peace Action, really good group. They have branches all over the place. What they want you to do is at least let your Congress member know, your House representative know that there's a bill. It was introduced by Jayapal Raskin, not my favorite. I don't love Jamie Raskin, but I like what he did here, and I actually thanked him for it. They have submitted a bill demanding that Trump call on Netanyahu to let in the humanitarian aid and stop this cruel savagery of shutting down any places where folks can go to get food. So that's obviously just what people should do. So you can click the link, demand real aid for Gaza. Now, I didn't sign the draft copy that they provide for you. The Peace Action provides you with copy. I didn't sign their draft copy because it went to Raskin. Raskin's a co-signer. He's a co-sponsor, rather. So given that he's a co-sponsor, I don't have to persuade him. Instead, I just simply said thanks. So you could do that if your rep is one of the co-sponsors, Jayapal Raskin. There's a couple of others. I think it's in the petition when you click to it. So that's something we can do. It's not much. It's a little bit. It's a little something. But yeah, something you can do to try to stop the killing. And it's so bad. Again, more facts. This is more from Al Jazeera, which I don't always center Al Jazeera, but I did today because they have an awful lot of really important information. Just, again, that just describes just the cruelty, the savagery, the inhumanity of Israel. Israel has destroyed 60% of the equipment in Gaza's blood banks. Gaza's health ministry says most equipment, this is from today, in the hospital labs and blood banks has been destroyed, with the remainder poorly maintained and lacking spare parts. And they note it was deliberately damaged, right? The Israeli military deliberately made it almost impossible for what medical facilities are still operating. And, the hospitals have all been damaged. They've all been bombed, but they still manage to go back in and try to provide help, like this little boy here, all blown up. You can see his face wrapped in a bandage, needs a transfusion. But, Israel's basically destroyed the equipment, damaged the equipment. So they can't provide the life-saving care. So again, sign that letter calling on your representative to vote in favor of a demand that Israel provide and open up the, end the siege, allow in the folks to provide food. All right, so it's not just, and by the way, we're kind of alone with Israel. I mean, what this war has done, a lot of people say, oh, Trump is, making us a pariah nation when they don't like the tariffs. The tariffs are making people mad at us. Forgive me for not really caring too much if some job offshore, some international lawyer doesn't like the tariffs. Forgive me for not being all bummed out that labor exploiters can't make as big a profit by employing people in third world countries for $1 an hour. I can't say I have a lot of sympathy for them, but when it comes to the full-throated, unwavering support that this administration and the prior administration provided Israel, the cover they provide Israel, the excuses, the protection they provide for Israel, that has rightly made us a pariah nation. Even our close, I guess what I would have to say, right, is Israel our closest ally? Probably. But, I think most of us would feel a little more comfortable viewing the United Kingdom as our closest ally. Even their Labour Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who has been pretty close, certainly was close to Biden when it came to the support that administration gave Israel. Starmer has said, nope, it's too much what Israel's doing. It's appalling and intolerable. So even the United Kingdom is condemning what Israel is doing and will not engage in free trade negotiations with Israel. So that's good, but so far it's had zero impact. From Ari, how long does the U.S. turn a blind eye? I wish, I can't answer that. I wish I could. My question is, what do we, people of good faith, people who want something a little better, what can we do? That's really where I am right now. And this is here is the hero of the moment. And even the Do Dissidents bros, and I'm not a huge fan. I like Do Dissidents pretty much. They gave mega props to Greta Thunberg. They said she was a hero. And this is a podcast, Do Dissidents. These are YouTubers who are pretty far in the left space like I am, but have been less overtly concerned about the climate holocaust, right? They have criticized environmentalists. They're pretty tight with Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore has gone after Greta Thunberg, calling her phony because she was at two reasons. One, she was at Davos, and he was saying, well, what is she doing there? How did she get there? Like trying to, make some ad hominem argument that she took a train or something that is environmentally bad. She should just stay in her little village in Sweden and never leave. I guess that's his argument. It's a pretty bad one. She was speaking truth to power at Davos, and I give her a lot of credit for that. And more reasonably, Dore criticized Greta for her support for NATO's war, proxy war via Ukraine against Russia. And Jimmy's right. That's a terrible thing. We shouldn't be supporting the war against Russia. We shouldn't be supporting that war, although I guess Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We shouldn't be promoting that war. We shouldn't be adding to the firepower that's being used to kill people in that area. We should be doing everything possible to end it. And that's where Trump has been a little better. Trump actually has a push for peace. It hasn't worked because Putin, I'm not going to, Putin's a bad guy. Putin wants war. There could have been peace 3 years ago. Now it looks like there can't be. I will not condemn Trump for that. But I will praise Greta Thunberg to the skies for what she is doing now. Here she is. And that's their Freedom Flotilla ship. Freedom Flotilla Coalition on their way to Gaza carrying humanitarian aid. I'm going to blow this up for you. I would note that this is their at least their second attempt to provide some aid to Gaza, and braving, real dangers, braving the Israeli military, the Israeli Air Force bombs.
Still missing 3, but let's start. Our latest attempt to go on with this mission, the boat was... We are watching a systematic starvation of 2 million people, a live stream genocide, and the world's silence is deadly. That is why we have to keep trying everything we can, even if the odds are against us.
Some have suggested Thunberg should drown at sea. So that was certainly what Lindsey Graham had to say. I think there's more about Graham in the lower thirds here. He hopes Greta and her friends can swim. Ha ha ha. Previous attempt failed after the ship was bombed in May.
He got bombed. You see the holes over here? Oh my God. Oh my God.
Situation in Gaza is worsening amid Israel's aid restrictions. We know that starving Palestinians are targeted and killed at distribution points. So I don't know who can be considered a greater hero than Greta Thunberg and the crew of that Freedom Flotilla. Just to digress, I was looking at my college reunion or college alumni book, whatever you call it. I don't even know. There's some term for those, but they send it out every year. Every few months, I get maybe now emails with descriptions of what different folks from my class and other classes are doing. And one of my classmates is a very successful author, and they went to Israel, I think at the very beginning of 2024, right? So after the killing on October 7, and then the reprisal, the completely disproportionate reprisal by Israel, and they went to Israel in the beginning of 24, and tried to help bring food and supplies into Gaza. And they were stopped. I believe they were detained by the Israeli military. They were not, as far as I know, arrested. They might have been. But they're also famous. They're Jewish. I think Israel didn't want some kind of international incident. And that was when Biden and Harris were still president. So there was less, they probably would have made some stir, whereas Trump could care less about arresting an author, writer. So they did go, and they did something really heroic, and I give them great credit. I say they partly because it's the pronoun, but also because it was they and their spouse. So I give them a lot of credit for doing that. It's pretty amazing. This is someone who's my age, so at that point, I guess around 60 years old. It's really awesome. But then they also called for Kamala. They tried to get Kamala elected. And I couldn't understand that. And I said, how could you be supporting Kamala after what you did to try to save the Palestinian people from American-Israeli genocide? And there was no, response. I didn't get an answer to that. I wish I had. I would have loved to have known the rationale. Maybe I would have found it even persuasive, a little tiny bit. I'm sure the answer would have been, well, haven't you been paying attention? Look at how much worse Trump is. And yeah, they're both awful when it comes to the genocide. But But they did something. They did something heroic, and I haven't done it. So, I ask, what should we be doing? Is that the answer? Is going down to Capitol Hill? Is calling your Congress member, if you live near Capitol Hill, is going to the Hill? Is going to your state capital? What's the answer? I'll tell you what the answer isn't. The answer isn't telling people, yeah, the Democratic Party leadership is part of the problem, but as long as we start electing people like AOC, we'll be fine. No, that's not the answer. I know in terms of, and I don't know, but my theory of change ultimately is that the change we need is address forcibly wealth and income inequality. In the end, these wars that we're seeing, the hatred, the Islamophobia is driven in such great amount of it is driven by the desire, right? The love of money is considered, I think, the root of all evil or something of that nature. And if you're starving, you're going to follow, any demagogue who promises you something better, who points the finger, who blames someone, who scapegoats others. If you're starving, if you're needy, if you feel like you're getting a raw deal, you're going to follow demagogues. And if you're privileged, or even if you just want to be privileged, and you can scam people, fool people, get them to do your bidding by pointing out scapegoats, by blaming other people, you'll do it. So hatred thrives when times are unfair and in unequal societies. It thrives. When you have relative equality, there's without question more brotherhood and sisterhood. There's more willingness to extend a helping hand to those who need. And I was thinking a lot about that. We're going to get into that. What we really need to do if we care about ending the killing, if we care about saving our planet, if we care about the ecocide and genocide, we have to figure out a way to elect people who will redistribute wealth and power. That's the only answer in the end. And I was thinking about that when I saw this post on Facebook. This is regarding the attack in Colorado at the Run for Their Lives event. And they wrote, the person who posted this wrote, anti-Semitism is a real and deadly problem. The attack in Colorado and the murder in D.C., plus Tree of Life, that was in Pittsburgh, and Poway, I didn't remember Poway, but that's a synagogue in San Diego where there was an anti-Semitic killing back in 2019, show as if it needed to be shown. So they're providing examples that they claim is proof of anti-Semitism. But college protesters against Israeli genocide and valedictorian speeches are not anti-Semitism, please. All right, well, I certainly agree with the last statement. But as we discussed in detail, I don't accept the framing of the Colorado attack as anti-Semitism. I don't frame the murders of the 2 Israeli embassy staffers. I don't accept the frame that that's anti-Semitism. It's being presented as anti-Semitism in the media, but there's no evidence of that. The only statements by the perps that we could rely on, there's certainly been no tweets, right? If there was any social media, let's say there was some social media, they were members of like some neo-Nazi group, then you can bet you'd be reading about that. This is not the case. These were people motivated by their absolute horror at what Israel is doing. Now, you could say their response was inappropriate, was not helpful, made things worse. I would agree with that. Just don't call it anti-Semitism. Someone says free Palestine, then take them at their word. They want a free Palestine. That's not anti-Semitism. So I got into it a little bit on that site, but the reason I'm presenting it is because I think there was a very, very interesting discussion about this. And one person wrote, now this wasn't me, but I'll tell you when it is me. One person commented about this post. By the way, the poster is, I believe, a Muslim. So it's not the poster who condemned the Colorado and embassy shooting, a Colorado firebombing, or whatever term you want to use, and the embassy shooting as anti-Semitic is actually, I believe, a Muslim. And the response from one person was very well to the point. However, while the act in Colorado and D.C. were certainly criminal, I don't see how they are anti-Semitic, since the basis was on political beliefs, not religion. And you can see 2 likes on one of those likes. So then the response is, well, anti-Semitism and political motives aren't mutually exclusive and are usually not. I highlighted the are usually not. It's certainly true. Anti-Semitism and political motives are certainly not mutually exclusive. Lots of things, for example, I keep going back to the Nazis, but they're sort of the most obvious example. Lots of actions by the Nazis were motivated politically and by anti-Semitism. There's no question. So they often do go hand in hand. And then they added, are usually not. In other words, usually these types of actions, which I assume they mean are critical of Israel, are usually not exclusive. They usually are both based on anti-Semitism. In other words, if you go after Israel, you're probably not necessarily motivated in part by anti-Semitism. Well, I highlight that because I think that's a load of crap. I'm not going to assume anyone's anti-Semitic, no matter how harsh their criticism of Israel is. Israel is a monstrous, evil, diabolical country. 85% of Israelis, according to the poll that I understand from Penn State, 85% want Gaza to be cleansed of Gazans. And almost 50% want them all killed. So I'm Jewish. I don't hate Jews, but I find absolutely reprehensible Israel, and I also don't support two-state solution. Only one-state solution where all are equal is viable. We know that for many reasons. In response to the point, though, that anti-Semitism and political actions are not mutually exclusive, I threw in my little snarky aside, because that's what I do. And I told you if I say it, you'll know it's me, because I'm going to keep my name up there. And I said, yeah, Israel's genocide of Palestinians, which has people so upset that they're, even some are resorting to murder. But yeah, that action by Israel, and with the help of the United States and Israel, and the insistence of so many Israelis and flax for Israel that criticizing Israel is the same as Nazism, that has caused people to be anti-Semitic. They're like, well, wait a second. If I criticize Israel, Israel's saying I must hate Jews, so I guess I hate Jews, right? I mean, it's if you accuse someone of something because they're doing something else, they're going to start saying, well, maybe I am guilty of that too. Maybe I did do that too. Maybe I am a hater, just like they say. So, okay, I think it's possible. I think it's very likely that when Zionists say Zionism is Judaism, hatred of criticizing Israel, hatred of Israel is hating Jews, some people say, okay, I guess I'm an anti-Semite then. So I agree with that. Yeah. And then there was a further response, which basically was, well, you know what? You can't blame Israel. People choose to be haters. They choose to be haters. I don't want to blame. I'm trying to understand what's going on here. Israel is committing a genocide. Israel is saying, hey, if you criticize us, if you say we shouldn't be a Jewish state, then you hate Jews. So people are saying, okay, I hate Jews then, I guess, based on your formulation. That's all. I'm not excusing anything. I'm trying to explain. But I also am giving you a roadmap. What we can do if we want to end anti-Semitism. I don't think you can end it, right? I mean, people are going to hate. But the way to reduce it, to reduce its impact, And there's no question. This is not even a hard one. Just like what we talk about, if Democrats want to get back in power, the way they can get back in power is they talk about Medicare for all. They talk about bringing good jobs back to America. They talk about, I know this, and it would sound unpopular in the moment, but if they had done it, if they implemented a fossil fuels tax and they returned the revenues to the American people, they would be very popular. I know it sounds unpopular, but in fact, it would be a popular policy. So I write, if you want people not to hate us Jews, because I'm Jewish, then here's what you do. You say, I'm Jewish. I hate what Israel's doing. I hate that crime against humanity. It's not in my name. So people understand it's not all Jews. It's just some Jews in Israel. That's the first thing you do. You insist that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. So you reject the argument out of hand. And then what is most important, although I put a third, is you fight tooth and nail to ensure that everyone has enough and none has too much. And the reason for that is that when people don't feel exploited, when people don't feel like they're getting a raw deal, when everyone says, hey, you know what? I'm doing okay. My family's doing okay. My boss isn't getting rich off of me, isn't getting super big and fat while I'm like a 19th century robber baron, while I'm barely surviving. We're all doing okay. You know what? When that's the case, people are going to be less angry. They're not going to have so much hate. And you know what else? When that's the case, if you can't get that rich off of exploiting others, off of, some kind of hucksterism, hustling, then you're not going to take advantage of them. You're not going to do bad things to them because it doesn't benefit you. I mean, some people are cruel, sadistic, and they will, but most will be like, yeah, I'm going to try to make things better throughout the world. So there's a huge, huge upside to wealth and income equality and an extraordinary downside to wealth and income inequality. And right now we're living in an extraordinarily unequal society. And one of the pathologies is increased hate. Now, I don't really think there is increased hate of Jews, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it's a load of crap. I haven't seen it. I don't believe it. I don't believe the numbers that AIPAC puts out. But even so, there is probably resentment against Jews. And, it's understandable. Jews are wealthy. We're the wealthiest religion in terms of, if you look at demographics, Jews are the religious group with the most money. It's just the case. And people are going to be envious. They're going to say, wait, it's not fair. Why should they have so much when I don't? And that's just how human nature is. That's the way people are. So if you don't want that envy to curdle into hatred and bitterness and perhaps violence led by demagogues, then change the dynamic in society so no one has too much and everyone has enough. By the way, that's the reason, a big reason. Now, I have said, and I'm not going back on this, but this is a big reason why I am not a champion in any way of reparations. I would vote for the bill in Maryland because I think, I wouldn't be a sponsor of it. I'm not I would vote for it, but I would really want my pet legislation to be sponsored as well. If you want me to sponsor your bill, guess what? I want you to sponsor Medicare for all. I want you to be fully in favor of guaranteeing every single Marylander health care, regardless of their skin color or anything else. I believe first and foremost in remedies that guarantee, enough, that guarantee everyone have economic rights. And here is this video really caught my attention. This is from I think it's fair to call them conservatives. These are three prominent I guess it's also fair to say they're black intellectuals. Glenn Loury, who has kind of, I think, come back a little bit because he has seen just how, I guess, inhumane some of the Trump policies are, how wrong-headed, and how, especially with regard to Israel, because Loury has been a critical of Israel, and he's been taken to task by some of the conservative groups. Specifically, I think it's the Manhattan Institute, where he was one of their top writers, and they said, yeah, well, you can't have all this criticism of Israel. And I think that really ticked him off, and rightly so. It should have ticked him off. But here you have Loury, who's a professor at Brown University of economics, I believe. John McWhorter on the right, Loury on the left. McWhorter, I believe, is at Columbia. And then in the center, unless he left Columbia, I'm not sure. And then in the center is a Wall Street Journal writer named Jason Riley. So they're all conservative. There's no question, or certainly center to center right. The affirmative action myth is something that Jason Riley wrote. Why blacks don't need racial preferences to succeed. And I don't really like that title very much. I mean, of course, blacks don't need affirmative or racial preferences to succeed, but I don't like that title because, as a professor once said to me in law school when we were having this conversation, is without affirmative action, sure, blacks will ultimately catch up. But what are we talking here? 500 years? As I understand it, in England, the descendants of William the Conqueror are wealthier than other English people. The descendants of William the Conqueror's army, who stayed in England after they, defeated they're the Normans because they're from Normandy, the French. They defeated the Saxons at the Battle of Hastings, and even today, the descendants of the Norman invaders in England are noticeably wealthier than the descendants of the Saxons who lost that war. And they go by names, if they have a French-sounding name. And for example, the people in England who have French-sounding names are richer than the people who have Saxon names. So, yeah, sure, in the end, everything will even out. But how long will it take? So I don't like that, why blacks don't need racial preferences to succeed. What I would say is that the most efficient and effective way to guarantee a measure of success to all is through colorblind policies, guarantees to all. But let's play what Jason Riley has to say, because I think it's quite interesting. This is towards the end, and then I'm going to get to a little bit more. But all of this is, again, what do we need to do to stop the killing? Because so much of that killing in Israel, by Israel right now, it's greed. It's we want that beachfront property. We want to expand. We want our living room, our living space, as the Nazis called it, Lebensraum. We'll push the Gazans out. They're poor. They don't have an army. We can push them into the desert and take their land. So it's greed, it's selfishness. We'll have more, they'll have nothing. But if you, again, guarantee all enough, first of all, the American people would be even more outraged and more disgusted, because right now people are desperate in this country to survive. They can't really focus to the degree I would like and that I'm able to, because I'm economically secure, on this terrible injustice that's being done around the world. But as even Shama Sawant said, hey, working people should be totally against Israel because our money is being used to genocide a population. But again, if there was real economic justice in America, there'd be even less support, and there isn't a lot of support now among American people for Israel, but there'd be even less. But also, if you had some kind of international equality, some sort of international equity anyway, Where the Israelis would be like, yeah, we have enough. We all have enough. Now, I'm not saying it would all go away. There's a lot of religious hatred. There's, they're taught in their schools and their religious institutions to have great disdain for the Palestinian people. They have a fake history. But a lot of that is secondary to this idea, this understanding that the more the Palestinians have, the less we have. We want what they have. All right, here's what Jason Riley has to say about affirmative action.
Well, again, I think people should not swallow whole this narrative that affirmative action has been a net good for Blacks, that it's been necessary in order for Blacks to rise in this country and to advance economically or educationally. Those things were happening. And the takeaway is that Blacks have done much better in terms of upward mobility when the focus is on colorblindness than when the focus is on special treatment. And
right, I wanted to stop that because that's really important what he just said. And it's true, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But what he's saying is that when their focus is on colorblind remedies that address poverty, period, not Black poverty, remedies that address any kind of disadvantage globally, just to make sure everyone, is relatively evenly situated based on income, based on being a citizen, based on being a resident of this country, that if you live here, you're eligible for programs and policies. That's what has had the impact that has reduced Black poverty and inequality, both within various, racial groups and also across them. So that's what Jason Riley is saying. And I understand he writes for the Wall Street Journal. He probably is far less of a fan of government programs that reduce wealth and income inequality the way I am. But he's saying, hey, colorblind remedies, that's what has worked in the past, not affirmative action. And he's right.
I think that that should be the direction our policymakers and our politicians move in when it comes to trying to address these divisions that we have and these gaps that we have. And that's what I hope people take away from the book, that colorblindness is the way to go, not racial preferences, which are not only divisive, not only unconstitutional, but ineffective in achieving their stated goals. And so...
All right, so I'm going to stop it there. But, he said a lot in a short time, but most important, ineffective. They haven't worked. He talks about 50 years of racial preferences in colleges and universities. They haven't reduced wealth and income inequality. In fact, during that time, for a good chunk of that time, the gap has risen, has grown. So I don't know how you can really take issue with what Riley's saying. I certainly don't. What I would note is that he's basically repeating something I wrote, I think, back in 2015. I don't think he's deliberate. I don't think he read what I wrote. I wrote this, I think, in 2015, 2016. With President Johnson's commitment to passing the Voting Rights Act and the broad range of social programs, now these are colorblind. These are not racial preferences. And what's interesting is he says why Blacks don't need affirmative action, which was a bad title for another reason. Because I say, hey, maybe they don't need them, obviously don't need them to succeed. But how are we going to, address poverty? We need something. We clearly need something. So I don't like the title, but also I don't like the fact that Riley takes on affirmative action, because he points out in the interview that affirmative action didn't originally mean preferences. It didn't originally mean, okay, well, we're going to have different objective standards. We're going to, have a pool of black applicants and a pool of Asian applicants and a pool of white applicants, and then you compete within your pool. That wasn't the original understanding of affirmative action. When JFK first used it in 1961, what affirmative action meant was exactly what the words are: affirmative action. Schools, colleges take action, take affirmative steps to be more diverse, to make sure that they're fair in the process, because the process was totally unfair to people of color. They weren't being considered. They weren't given opportunities that they deserved, that they should have been given, that they had every right to expect. And they would have gone if they were white. So affirmative action was designed to level the playing field so that people are considered, as Dr. King said, based on the content of their character, their achievements. And then it morphed into something different, which are the racial preferences that Riley criticizes. And, I support reparations because it would mean less poverty. I support that. Wouldn't be my strategy. That wouldn't be my vehicle. I think it's incredibly divisive, but it would reduce poverty. But it's not the best way. It's not the most effective way. And it's counterproductive in many ways. What Johnson did, what the Democrats starting with the New Deal did, what Great Society did, was Medicare, Medicaid, healthcare for the seniors, healthcare for the poor, Fair Housing Act. Everyone gets to, you don't get to discriminate against people based on race when you sell a house, when you rent out an apartment. The first person who qualifies based on income, based on whatever objective standards you may have, maybe, down payment. Whoever qualifies for that gets it, gets the apartment, gets the home. That's the Fair Housing Act. Those policies, those laws made things so much better. And guess what? Things got more even too. Between 1960 and 1970, median black family income rose 52%, while white family income also rose by a significant amount, 37%, but not as much. So you see the wealth and income gap actually closing because of colorblind policies, not because of affirmative action. Now, affirmative action did begin in terms of racial preferences, I guess, in the late 1960s. So I just want to, because I was looking for that. You can't say it was affirmative action in terms of racial preferences that started the gap to close, because it didn't come into effect until the gap stopped closing. Colleges and universities, I guess the best way to put this is use different standards for minority students, if you want to say lower standard, lower SAT scores, lower grade GPAs maybe, starting in the late 60s. That's when these first began. Prior to that, the colleges and universities were being observed in the 60s to make sure that they allowed qualified black students in, that they didn't deny them admission based on race, not that they make spaces available specifically for black people. That changed in the late 60s. That time period, the late 60s, when we first started seeing this real racial preferences come into effect, was exactly when the racial wealth gap and income gap stopped closing, when it started to grow. And this is something that Elizabeth Warren tells us. So what we see is when race cognizant programs, when not race blind, but race cognizant programs began to come into the fore, wealth and income, the wealth and income gap actually began to grow. And this is what Senator Warren tells us. So she gave this speech, and I wrote about this some time ago, but this is what she said. During the exact time period when racial preferences were in effect, 90% of Americans saw no real wage growth. So we saw that wage growth from the 40s through the end of the 60s because of the Great Society, the New Deal, policies like that, the GI Bill. We saw wealth and income grow across the board, and we saw the wealth and income gap start to close. When racial preferences began, so did a very significant reduction in the commitment of the federal government to addressing poverty. So did a very significant reduction in the amount of energy and money that the federal government spent on helping poor, struggling, and working people, both in rural communities, in urban communities, and everywhere else. And once the federal government stepped back, wage growth stopped for 90% of Americans. And the wealth gap between black and white families from 84, so that's during Reagan years, when Reagan really pulled the rug out from government programs, massive cuts in government spending, enormous cuts in the taxes paid by the rich. So from 84 to 09, the wealth gap between black and white families tripled. That was also the exact period of time when racial preferences were almost in full effect. And we saw a Bakke decision in University of California in the late 70s, peeled back some of that by colleges. But still, there were different standards. It didn't work. It didn't, as Jason Riley said, that didn't address the underlying problem. And at the same time, our society became meaner, more unfair. We saw skyrocketing incarceration rates, right? Anger, resentment grew. When we saw the middle class, the working class getting a fair share, or at least a much, much fairer share of the pie, that's when we had civil rights. That's when we were able to reduce tensions between groups of people. Once that stopped, once the Great Society programs, welfare, there was welfare reform by Clinton, more anger, more animus, more resentment. It's absolutely true that aggressive government policies designed to guarantee that everyone has enough, people aren't sleeping under bridges, and that no one has enormous stockpiles of wealth. Those policies make for a happier, kinder, better, more peaceful society. Final point before we go. What about the incentives? We keep hearing, well, you got to reward the risk takers. You want entrepreneurs to go out there. We want creative destruction, so we get Facebook. Because God knows how great it is to have Facebook after all. We have seen when we had extraordinarily high top marginal tax rates, people acting remarkably generously and altruistically. And not only that, but creating, building, succeeding. So I always think this is a really instructive example. The polio vaccine. Polio is a scourge in the early 20th century, first half of the 20th century. My mother tells me about this. Sometimes you would be scared to go to the swimming pool because you'd see kids there who maybe had a limb amputated. President Roosevelt was a victim of polio. It could be spread at these, public areas like pools, again, swimming pools, as I understand it. A crippling and life-threatening disease. And when was the cure discovered? When was the great efforts made first to come up with a cure and then to actually cure it? Well, in the 40s and 50s in the United States, at an exact time when we had 90+% top marginal tax rates, when the gap between the rich and everybody else was the lowest. And you might say, well, this is different. This is medicine. Is it? Some of the highest, most compensated people in the world right now are the owners of and CEOs of healthcare companies. So the rewards are astronomical now if you find some sort of life-saving drug. If it's a disease that inflicts that afflicts rich people anyway. And polio did exactly that. This was a disease that the affluent suffered, like FDR. And yeah, but poor people too, working people too. I mean, it was across the board. And despite the fact that Jonas Salk knew if he discovered a cure for polio, he wouldn't get rich off of it, particularly because if he sold the patent for a few million or 10 million or $100 million, whatever it was, most of it would be taxed by the US government. But he went ahead and he found the cure anyway. He said, I'm going to solve this. I care about humanity. His best instincts led him to cure this terrible disease without even the hope of enormous remuneration. But even then, he didn't even take the profits. He said, I'm going to just give the patent. It's public. No patent. Because he cared about humanity. Now, I'm not that means he was a great person, a great man, of course. But the broader point is, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to discovering new solutions to our problems, you don't need to reward people with billions. You don't need to shovel billions of dollars in front of them. They'll do it because they're good people, because they care. Or maybe they just are hardworking. Maybe, Mark Zuckerberg, you can reward him for Facebook. He just doesn't need to have $80 billion. You can reward. I mean, I use Amazon. I like Amazon. I don't like going shopping. I don't like going out. I like to sit at my computer and click on a few things and have the item brought to me. So reward Jeff Bezos. Just don't reward him to the tune of $100 billion. He'd still create Amazon if he only had $100 million, I'm almost certain. I'll bet he would have still done it. You don't need to dangle a pot of gold to get people to try to cross that rainbow. You could just dangle a bag of gold and they'll go for it. So many benefits, so many advantages from much higher top marginal tax rates, from a much tighter safety net. So many ways we would all be happier, live a more rewarding life, and also be able to address the challenges that we are all facing. How do we get there? How do we get there? How do we get to that better place? That's what we try to figure out here. I'll be back tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.